There was a guy who tagged me in a post in my Facebook boxing group the other day. And in this post, he was criticizing me and criticizing the direction that he claims my channel has gone in. He says that he is a long-time subscriber, that he's always liked my channel because I'm unbiased, I'm impartial. I go by the motto, no fighter is below praise and no fighter is above criticism. So he liked me because of this. But he says that he doesn't like the direction my channel has gone in over the past few months because he claims that I am exhibiting anti-Deontay Wilder bias. And that's what the channel has become, where I'm calling Deontay Wilder a hillbilly, a chicken chaser, all that kind of stuff. Well, first of all, thank you for the comment. You know, he addressed me respectfully. He wasn't trying to throw mud or anything like that. It's respectful criticism. Here's the thing. I can only say it as I see it. I'm not an insider. I'm somebody who comments on boxing from the perspective of a boxing consumer. Yes, I've got some boxing experience myself, and I do know a few professional boxers. I have spoken to some professional boxers and whatnot, both behind the scenes and once or twice on my channel in interviews. But for the most part, I represent the boxing consumer. So I assess situations as an outsider looking in and use my rational mind to try and break things down and come to whichever conclusion I think is most plausible or most likely in any situation. That's what I do. I'm not going to get it right every time. All right? Unless I'm an insider, unless you're an insider and you know both camps and you don't really bias towards either camp and you know what's going on both sides of the table. Unless you're in that position, and very few people are, then you're not going to get things right every time either. We're all going to be wrong here and there. What I try to do is, yes, give my opinion on situations like Wilder versus Joshua, who's lying and who's being factual. But ultimately, I have to look at the big picture. And for example, with the Wilder situation, I don't know for sure who's lying between Eddie Hearn and Shelley Finkel. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't trust either of them. But what I do know is that Anthony Joshua is a multi-millionaire. Anthony Joshua has had about half the number of professional fights that Deontay Wilder has had. But yet he's made about 5 times as much money, if not more. Anthony Joshua is from a country which has a population that is 5 times smaller than the United States? But somehow he's made far more money. He's fought in football stadiums in front of 90,000 people when Deontay Wilder can't even fill out a 20,000 seater arena in a country which is 5 times as big as the country Joshua's from. These are the things we know as a fact. And so when Deontay Wilder comes out and says that Eddie Hearn is a terrible promoter, this is what Deontay Wilder has said. He said, who the hell would sign with you? He said, Eddie Hearn's a terrible promoter and he's killing boxing. Killing boxing? Boxing was in the dark ages. Boxing was in the doldrums in the United Kingdom before Eddie Hearn came along. Facts. Eddie Hearn has revived and revitalized British boxing. And yes, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Yes, his dad was a millionaire when Eddie Hearn was growing up. And he has had a massive head start, on most other boxing promoters. Of course he has. But so have Frank Warren's kids. Frank Warren was a more successful promoter in the 1990s, boxing promoter at least, than Eddie Hearn's dad Barry was. Frank Warren has sons. They're in the boxing business too, but they haven't been as successful as Eddie Hearn. It's not just Eddie Hearn's silver spoon upbringing and the fact that his dad is a boxing promoter or was a former boxing promoter. It's not just that has led to Eddie Hearn's success. No, it's also the fact that Eddie Hearn is very good at his job and he's a very good promoter. As I say, Frank Warren's sons are in the boxing business, but they haven't had even a fraction of the success that Eddie Hearn has had because they're not as talented as he is. So for Deontay Wilder to call a man like Eddie Hearn, who's had as much success as he's had, who's made so many fighters rich as he has, who's put on so many enormous events, who's absolutely dominating and killing it in the UK, and now he's going over to the United States and signing. For him to call somebody like that a terrible promoter shows that Deontay Wilder is not a very bright man. You can say that you don't trust Eddie Hearn in terms of the things that he says. But in terms of if not trusting him as a fighter who potentially might sign with Eddie Hearn, does Eddie Hearn have a track record of being involved in legal battles with his former fighters? No, he doesn't. Plenty of other promoters do. The Sauerlands have been in legal battles with several fighters. Yvonne Michel in Canada has been in legal battles with several fighters. Well, one fighter anyway that I know of, which is Artur Beterbiev, and that's been recent. Frank Warren's been in legal battles with many, many fighters over the years. Bob Arum's been involved in legal battles with fighters. Don King's been involved with legal battles with fighters. Name me the legal battles with fighters. Show me what the legal battles with fighters that Eddie Hearn's been involved in. So yeah, you might not trust everything he says, but if you look at his track record in terms of the way he treats his fighters, compared to most other promoters out there, he treats fighters better. Look how many millionaires he's created. Look how many massive paydays he's got for his fighters. And yet you've got Deontay Wilder talking about Eddie Hearn's terrible, he's a cancer in boxing, and he's this, that, and the other. Look at all the great fights and the great shows he's put on. Compared to most other boxing promoters, not only in the UK, but even in the United States, over the past 4 or 5 years. Wilder is just not that bright if he can sit there and say Eddie Hearn's a terrible promoter. He's just not very bright. I'm not saying Eddie Hearn is a perfect human being. I'm not saying I would trust him implicitly. I certainly wouldn't. I'm not saying he doesn't tell lies. Of course he does. But to say that the man is not good at his job when you're managed by Shelley Finkel and you don't even have a promoter and you haven't earned a fraction of what Eddie Hearn's heavyweight champion has earned, where are you going with that? This is why I question Deontay Wilder's intellect. And in terms of using pejorative terms like calling him a hillbilly and a chicken chaser and all this kind of stuff, well, it's all fun and games at the end of the day, but Deontay Wilder has been the one who has consistently belittled anybody who doesn't necessarily believe his team's version of events when it comes to this Wilder-Joshua negotiation. If you don't believe Wilder's version of events, he starts belittling you on social media and comes out in interviews and belittles anyone who believes anything Eddie Hearn says. So we must believe that Shelley Finkel is the most honest man in boxing. He's never told a lie. And also at the same time believe that Eddie Hearn has never told the truth in his life. It's a ridiculous position to take. If you're objective and you're an outsider looking in, as 99.9% of us are, you can't for sure know who's telling the truth in this situation. How could you know? It's an opinion based on your assessment of the few facts that we have. We're not in the boardrooms. We haven't seen the contracts on both sides. Do you understand what I'm saying? But yet, Deontay Wilder's got this view like if you don't believe him and you believe Eddie Hearn, you're stupid and this, that. So when he's coming at the fans like that, I have to be real about the guy. He comes across as someone who is not very bright. I'm not saying he's the dumbest guy in the world, but I do think that Deontay Wilder is a very emotional guy. And emotions can cloud your judgment, you know? So maybe it is a little harsh of me to act as though Deontay Wilder's a dunce, because I don't think he's that dumb, all right? But what I will say, you know, retrospectively, I'll say that he is a guy who is not extremely intelligent, but he has this emotional streak in him. And when his emotions kick up, that brings his IQ way, way down and impairs his judgment very severely. Because again, how can you be calling a man who has got his heavyweight champion to earn 5 times more than you, even though he's in a much smaller country, and he's filling out stadiums, 90,000. How can you call a man who's got his heavyweight champion, all that, a terrible promoter, and wonder why anybody would sign with him? What on earth is going on in your head if you can come out and make statements like that? That's madness. If Deontay Wilder was promoted by Eddie Hearn, Hearn surely couldn't have done a worse job than the people who handle Deontay Wilder right now. In fact, some people have said this before. Some people in the United States, okay, before this whole this Deontay Wilder Joshua beef kicked up, they said that Wilder would have been better off from a promotional standpoint staying with Golden Boy. And I'm not 100% sure about it, but I will say that Golden Boy, at least they have Alvarez, right? At least they've got this cash cow fighter. So if Wilder had been fighting on Alvarez undercards this whole time as a champion, that probably would have helped his profile, to be fair. Not necessarily because Golden Boy are so great at promoting, but because Deontay Wilder would have benefited from the Alvarez spotlight. You know, he would have got a piece of that shine. So there is something to be said for, you know, if he'd stayed with Golden Boy, he might have done better in terms of his public profile. But that wasn't to be known, you know. A fighter can be a star one day and the next day they're washed up and finished. So it was impossible for the people handling Wilder's career in terms of his management to know that Golden Boy would have been the better route, you know, the better people to stay with in terms of his public profile. They were trying to do something unique with Al Heyman, and maybe they thought that that was the way to go. Well, they obviously did think that was the way to go. But nonetheless, Eddie Hearn, if you look at his track record in the UK, he's a very good salesman. He is a very forward-thinking boxing promoter. He understands the market. He certainly understands the market in the UK. I think it's going to be more difficult for him in the US. Not only because he doesn't understand the market as well, but also because there is some resistance from the boxing establishment in the US. They feel threatened by Eddie Hearn. And there's also some resistance in terms of the hardcore boxing fans who, in fact, not even the hardcore boxing fans. Scratch that. There's resistance from the new fair weather Deontay Wilder fanatics who have grown exponentially in number over the past couple of months. They are like a rot. You know, they're operating like a rotten, festering bacteria and infecting other boxing fans in the United States and saying, well, Eddie Hearn's just the devil and he's terrible and, you know, never trust this man and don't ever sign with him and all this kind of stuff. And so you've got fighters who are not very bright, who are being influenced by this and deciding not to sign with Eddie Hearn. And again, I'm not here telling all these American fighters to sign with Eddie Hearn. All I'm saying is, if you don't sign with Eddie Hearn and you don't sign with DAZN, do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because you've got some type of misplaced patriotism or because of your perception of the Wilder Joshua negotiations. Don't do it because of that. Look at the deal that he's offering you. If he's offering you a good deal, good money, you should entertain it. You shouldn't be thinking about it from an emotional point of view. You need to get your business mind on. You know how many fighters Don King ripped off over the decades in the United States? The amount of court cases this man had with fighters, but yet fighters kept on signing with Don King. I'm telling you right now that Eddie Hearn is no angel. He's certainly not a bastion of truth and morality, but he's way more trustworthy and he treats fighters way better than Don King ever did. That's what I can guarantee you. And yet Don King was the most successful promoter in the United States for many, many years. So don't try to come at me and act like, oh, Eddie Hearn is just terrible and nobody should. It's nonsense. Even the promoters who are in American boxing today, the Arams, the Golden Boys, so on and so forth, none of these guys are treating fighters any better than Hearn is treating them. I'm not saying they're necessarily treating them worse, but I'm saying they're not treating the fighters any better. None of them have had the success that Eddie Hearn has had in such a short space of time. None of them have been packing out 90,000 seat stadiums. Dylan White and Joseph Parker, neither one of them are world champions. They just fought on pay-per-view. They just did, from what I heard, and I don't know if this is confirmed yet, but this is the rumor on the grapevine, but in a country of only 60 million people, Dylan White and Joseph Parker have just drummed up something like £7 million in pay-per-view revenue. In dollars, I guess that's like $10 million in pay-per-view revenue. Two guys who are not even world champions. Now in America, where the population is 5 times bigger, you won't even get guys there with a 5 times bigger population who are not champions that can generate a $10 million pay-per-view. Do you think any of the contenders, the heavyweight contenders in America, can do a $10 million can generate $10 million in pay-per-view sales? Any of the heavyweight contenders? None of them can right now. And the population in America is 5 times bigger than the UK. So, yeah, that's what it is for me with Deontay Wilder in terms of questioning his intelligence. It's the stuff he says, the facts that we know about him, he doesn't speak intelligently. He speaks like an emotional guy, an irrational guy, and he comes at the fans sideways when they don't agree with everything he says. How do we know that he's the one in the right? How do we know that Shelly Finkel's telling 100% truth and Eddie Hearn is telling 100% lies? How the hell do we know? We're not insiders. We're just trying to interpret things from the outside looking in. And so we're going to have different opinions. The position I take is that Joshua and Wilder are willing to fight each other. I don't think either one of them is scared of the other man. That's my instinct. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what my gut tells me. And that's what the history, certainly of Anthony Joshua, shows, that he's not scared. You go look at his amateur career. You look at the guys he fought in the amateurs in their backyards when he was very inexperienced and how well he performed. That shows he ain't scared. As a professional, how quickly he's been moved, how much pressure has been on this man, and he hasn't cracked under all this pressure. When most fighters do, when most fighters have all that pressure, all this press attention, all this public attention on them, and they're just young fighters learning their trade, most fighters crack under all that stress. Anthony Joshua didn't. He won the world title. What was it? His 17th fight, whatever it was. Defended it. Fought Klitschko, fought Parker, fought Takam. He's been in many high stress, high pressure situations. He's never showed fear. He's never cracked in them situations. The fact that he put himself in there against Klitschko when he had less than 20 fights, and people say, well, Klitschko was coming off a layoff. Okay, but people were still picking Klitschko before the fight. Plenty of people were picking Klitschko before the fight. Deontay Wilder himself, he was unsure. He kept on saying, my heart says Joshua, but my head says Klitschko. That's what Wilder was saying. So you can't then, after the fight, say, oh, well, you know, Klitschko was old. No, Klitschko performed very well in the fight. Stacey McKinley, who was a top trainer in America for many years, he said that's the best Klitschko he's seen for years. And I agree. I think Klitschko was much sharper against Joshua than he was against Fury. Yes, Fury is a different style. And Fury might have been beaten that version of Klitschko too. But that version of Klitschko had more purpose. He was lighter. He had a chip on his shoulder. That version of Klitschko was the best version of Klitschko I've seen for a while, the one that fought Joshua. Joshua went in there with a guy like that when he had less than 20 fights. All the while, Deontay Wilder, with his manager Shelly Finkel, he ducked the Klitschko fight for years. For years, he ducked that fight. He let two Brits go and fight Klitschko. Yeah? Wilder had his title all those years. Joshua became champion. And Wilder still wouldn't fight Klitschko. In fact, before Joshua became champion, then Fury was champion. Fury went to go fight Klitschko. Fury beat him. And then Joshua so all this time, Wilder has had to fight Klitschko. He didn't fight him, but two Brits did. And now everybody's acting like Wilder is the savior of the division and he's the only real champion out there and this, that. People, stop it. Stop it. Let's deal with the facts, the things that we do know for a fact. What we do know for a fact is that Wilder ducked Klitschko for years. He had plenty of opportunities to fight him. He turned them all down. He could have given Klitschko a voluntary shot at his title after Klitschko lost to Fury, but he didn't do that. Joshua did. He gave him a voluntary shot. Why didn't Wilder do that? Jeez, man, these are the facts. You see, these are not things that are speculation. These are things we know for a fact. So, you know, I respect Deontay Wilder as a fighter. I think he's a fantastic fighter. I think he's very dangerous. I think he's athletically gifted. I think he's a prolific puncher. But I'm real about his career and what he's done. I don't just see him as in the right every time. And the same way with Joshua. I don't see as Joshua and Eddie Hearn as being in the right every time. I've said many times, and you know, to address what this guy again said in his comment, he pointed out all these recent videos that I've made criticizing Deontay Wilder, but what he didn't do is he didn't point out all the recent videos where I've criticized Eddie Hearn and said that Eddie Hearn is, you know, untrustworthy and greedy, and I've called Anthony Joshua greedy. He hasn't pointed out the fact that in the past, when Eddie Hearn tried to come at Al Heyman sideways, I went in on Eddie Hearn. And so what does that say? That says that he is only focusing on the times when I criticize Wilder and totally ignoring the times when I criticize Hearn and Joshua. Why? Because I'm not the one who's really biased. It's him, respectfully. The guy who came at me with that comment, he's the one who's biased. Because if I don't 100% agree with his viewpoint, all of a sudden I'm biased. How does that work? I told you, no fighter is below praise, no fighter is above criticism on my channel. Same goes for promoters. I've criticized Eddie Hearn in the past, harshly, strongly, and I will do so in future. But right now, the way that I see things, yeah, I don't know for a fact who's behind what in the negotiation between Camp Joshua and Camp Wilder. But what I do know for a fact is that Eddie Hearn has done great things as a promoter. What I do know for a fact is that he's paying his fighter a hell of a lot of money, a lot more than Wilder's getting. What I do know for a fact is that Anthony Joshua has fought far better opponents than Deontay Wilder has fought in his career in half the number of fights. These are things I do know for a fact. When you when you go off that, how could you possibly put all the criticism on Joshua and believe everything that Wilder said? How could you do that if you're objective? You couldn't do that. If you do, you're not objective. You're biased. And most of the people who don't like what I'm doing right now, they're biased in favor of Deontay Wilder. Most of them are Americans. Not all of them, but most of them are American. Most of them are biased in favor of Wilder. And or they're people who just hate Eddie Hearn. Anything Eddie Hearn does, as far as they're concerned, is horrible, is terrible. You know, it doesn't matter how many good cards he puts on, no matter how many good fights happen on his cards, he's still the worst thing to ever happen to boxing. And these people are deluded. These people are insane. Simple as that. Eddie Hearn has put on more good shows than any other boxing promoter in the UK for many, many years. Eddie Hearn's cards are light years better than Frank Warren's cards at this point. Frank Warren has put on one card this whole year that was even half decent, and that was the Lee Selby Josh Warrington card. I mean, not even the card, the fight. Lee Selby Josh Warrington, that was a world title fight, and it was a good fight. And it was a big event. The undercard was horrible for the most part. Right? Our undercard was horrible. But the main event was good. Other than that, Frank Warren has done nothing. Yeah, he put on some domestic level fights and stuff like that here and there that were okay, but not between any fighters of any consequence who anyone cares about or any fighters who are particularly entertaining, at least not to me. He ain't done that. Frank Warren has had a shit year in boxing so far. As far as I'm concerned, as a consumer, I'm not impressed by what he's putting out at all. His events all have a very bargain basement feel to them. And when he does have certain fighters out there, like his Daniel Dubois and his Anthony Yards, I mean, Yard is fighting random, never heard their name before, Eastern European fringe contenders and journeymen, and headlining shows doing that. Daniel Dubois is only a young guy, 8 or 9-0, whatever he is. So he's still fighting journeymen, and that's okay, because he's at that type of stage in his career where it's okay to be doing that. But that's not exactly headline material, is it? You got Billy Joe Saunders, who's injured most of the time, and when he's not injured, he's defending his world title like once a year in a leisure center. You got Tyson Fury is taking on people like Sefer Safiri, getting booed at his own event. Frank Warren shows are, for the most part, crap. Eddie Hearn, if you are seriously sitting there and trying to tell me that Eddie Hearn shows are not as good as Frank Warren shows right now, then I don't know what you're smoking. You don't have to like Eddie Hearn as a person. You could think he's an absolute you-know-what or whatever, all right? But in terms of the product that he's delivering, don't try to tell me that he's not delivering better product than Frank Warren. Give me a break. Of course he is. What kind of stupidity would lead you to come out with something so ridiculous as to say that Eddie Hearn's not putting on better shows than Frank? What are you talking about? And obviously, Eddie Hearn has put on some crap shows. Every promoter in the history of boxing has put on poor shows. Here and there, of course. But history remembers the good shows. And Eddie Hearn has put on multiple shows over the past few years, which will be remembered fondly in years and years to come, including this most recent big show that he did, the Dylan White, Joseph Parker. That was an amazing card. That delivered and then some. Joe Parker versus Dylan White was a great fight. Takam Chisora was a great fight. Dave Allen versus Nick Webb, a domestic level fight, but that's what people want to see in domestic level fights, is two big guys knocking lumps out of each other. Spectacular knockouts. That's what people want to see. It's a great card. When's the last time Frank Warren put on something like that? Frank Warren's been talking about putting on pay-per-views for how long now? When's Frank Warren actually going to deliver with his pay-per-view? Not that I want everything to be pay-per-view, but pay-per-view means that he believes the card is worthy of pay-per-view because it's big enough, because the fighters demand those kind of purses because they're that level of fighter. Well, Frank Warren doesn't have anybody like that right now. You know, well, Carl Frampton, truth be told, is an excellent fighter. Okay? Maybe I should have mentioned Carl Frampton earlier, but that's a new acquisition for Frank Warren, as is Tyson Fury. And I hope things improve for Frank Warren. Not because I care about his pockets, I don't, but I do care about more quality boxing coming to the television for the British boxing fans. So I hope that things improve for boxing on BT Sport, and that we see Tyson Fury and Anthony Yarde and Daniel Dubois and all these guys involved in compelling fights. I hope we do. But as things stand right now, there's a massive gap in quality between what Frank Warren's putting on and what Eddie Hearn's putting on. A massive gap. A gulf, a chasm. That's the reality of the situation. So, yeah, it is what it is, man. Deontay Wilder, I respect him as a fighter. And as I keep saying, I'm not even sitting here. See, I'm not a fanboy. I'm not sitting here and telling you that Deontay Wilder is going to get destroyed by Anthony Joshua. I'm not sitting there and telling you that Deontay Wilder can't fight. I'm telling you he can fight. I'm telling you that he may well beat Anthony Joshua. I'm telling you that I'm not sure who wins that fight. That's why I want to see it so much. See, this is the difference between me, one of the differences between me and all these Wilder fanboys who just sit around calling Anthony Joshua a coward and Eddie Hearn the worst promoter in the world. See, these people are not objective. They can never give Joshua or Hearn credit for anything. They discredit everything they do. I don't discredit everything Wilder does. I give Wilder credit for a lot of stuff that he does. So much of his career I've been defending Deontay Wilder. I ain't just rubbishing everything he does across the board wholesale. No, because that would not be a logical thing to do. And again, that's the difference between me and these Wilder fanboys. They're not logical. They're not objective. As far as they're concerned, Anthony Joshua is trash. He can't fight. His promoter is terrible. You see? And this is what I criticize when it comes to them. This is also what I criticize when it comes to Wilder. Wilder's not a logical man. The stuff he comes out with is ridiculous. So if you think I'm biased against Wilder, it's probably you projecting. Well, it is you projecting your own biases onto me. Excuse me. The reality is your bias. And because your bias and my view doesn't sync with yours, you think I'm biased. Do you ever give Anthony Joshua credit for anything? Do you ever give Eddie Hearn credit for anything? Are they both just so terrible at their job? Are they both just the biggest frauds in boxing? Do you ever criticize Deontay Wilder for anything? Is he possible of lying? Are his team possible? Or his team capable, of speaking an untruth? Is Shelley Finkel incapable of telling a lie? Do you really believe this? So who's really biased? Who's really crazy? Me or you? When you're the ones running around acting like Shelley Finkel is the most trustworthy manager in boxing. I mean, do you know Shelley Finkel's background? Jeez, people. Anyway, let me leave it there. I'll leave you guys to chew on everything I talked about in this video. Deontay Wilder, excellent fighter, dangerous fighter, talented fighter. But not the sharpest tool in the box when it comes to business. And Eddie Hearn, Anthony Joshua, greedy men. Definitely. From what I can see, they're very greedy. But smart. And good at their job. Anthony Joshua is a very good fighter. Eddie Hearn, a very good promoter. In fact, I'll go as far as saying this. Eddie Hearn is a better promoter than Anthony Joshua is a fighter. It's that deep. And Anthony Joshua is an excellent fighter. But I think Eddie Hearn is even better at his job than Anthony Joshua is. Yeah. There's not that much competition out there for Eddie Hearn right now. But there's a lot of competition out there for Anthony Joshua, including Povetkin, by the way. That's no walk in the park. Do I expect Anthony Joshua to win? Yes. But that's dangerous. I'll leave it there. Talk to me in the comments, people. It's happening. I'm out.